Awesome. So look, I want to be as gracious and as kind as I tell the story as humanly possible. Sometimes I think us preachers, we get a bad rap because, well, it's totally deserved. Because we're just a little more hostile than we need to be. And we're a little more harsh than we need to be. Especially when we talk about like sin and bad things and dumb things that people do. Like we just come down on people for basic things. And I don't want to be that. Because look, the Bible is written about real people who lived real lives in real situations, right? And I am a real person living a real life in a real situation. And you are real people living real lives in real situations. And what that means is that, like, basically anything that the Bible describes is something that you and I could do. And I just always want to be aware of that like, no matter, like, and it's good, by the way, like you read amazing things in the Bible and we're supposed to read those things and think, oh man, I could do that. I could be that person doing this courageous, beautiful, wonderful thing. But then also when we read about all the bad stuff, we're also supposed to be convicted, I think. And we're supposed to look and say, those are just regular people doing regular things, and I'm a regular person doing regular things. And so these evil, wicked, harmful, hurtful, and sometimes downright ridiculously dumb things that people are doing, well, I could be that. I could do that. And so I want us to be aware up front that as we have this conversation that it could be us. In many ways, you could say on a spiritual level, it just kind of was us. It is us, because this is just what humanity does. And what I mean is this story. So the people of Israel, they never had a king. And that makes sense. Like when you think about the history of Israel, like Israel starts with one guy. God calls Abraham. He says, I want you to leave your home and I want you to go somewhere else and follow me, and I'm going to make you a nation. And so the nation starts with a guy. And if you're a guy and you declare yourself king of nothing, that's like a sign that you should see psychiatric help, And then it continues. The one guy has the nation of but the nation's just his family. Like it's like sons and grandsons and stuff. And so if like your nation is just a one family and somebody declares themselves king, imagine if a family member that you're at Thanksgiving or something and some guy stands up and is like, I'm the king of all of you. I mean, like I'm not saying you should kick people out of your family, but maybe. Like that's weird. And so then they grow, right? But they grow in Egypt. Remember, they are just kind of a family and an extended family until they get to Egypt, and they grow in Egypt. And at first, it's fine because they're guests of the king, right? They're not going to have a new king because there's already a king. He's the Pharaoh, and he's a king, and so you wouldn't have a new king because there's already a king, and it's fine because you're guests. But then that Pharaoh dies, a new Pharaoh comes along. He doesn't like the Jewish people, and he enslaves them for like 400 years. And I don't know if you know a lot about slaves, but slaves can't really elect a king either. So it makes sense that in this whole story of God's people, that in the first several centuries, that it doesn't make any sense for them to have a king. And so once they got their freedom, the Exodus, Moses, let my people go, the Red Sea, all of that, they didn't think we should have a king. They had never had one. And it's kind of one of those things where if you don't know what you're missing, you don't know that you're missing it. It's a really easy principle in life. And so they didn't know that they didn't know that they should have a king, or they didn't need a king or whatever. Like they had no idea. And so they didn't. They just followed Moses and Aaron and others, and then Joshua and again others. But the system kind of went like this. If you were to ask ancient Jewish people of that time period, who is your king? They would say, well, God. We don't have a king other than God is our king. And if you asked them, okay, well, how do you know what God, who, by the way, is invisible and doesn't speak to most people, like directly in, voices, how is it that you know what God wants? They would say, oh, well, we have these priests, we have these prophets, we have these leaders who help us to hear the voice of God in a practical way. And again, I want to be as gracious and as kind as possible. And I'll say this, that is a beautiful system. It's a wonderful system. It made the people of Israel holy. Because the word holy just means different. It just means set apart. The entirety of the world, all the other nations, they all had kings, right? But Israel didn't. Israel had this unique relationship with their God, which they believed rightly that is the only God. But they had this unique relationship with their God, that God was their king and nobody else was. But you can see the problem, right? Like, how many times in your life do you think that maybe God wanted you to do something, but in hindsight, you realize it was just kind of what you wanted? I mean, that happens, right? Like, it's a universal Christian thing, or not even Christian, it's a religious thing. Right? Like, how often is it's just hard to tell the voices in your head and the desires in your heart. It's hard to tell where God is leading, where you are. But it's a hard system, but it works as long as everybody's cool. It's amazing how many things in life are like that. It works as long as everybody's cool. And so everybody was cool for a long time. But then there was this prophet named Samuel, and he had these 2 kids, and they were terrible. And everything works till everybody, as long as everybody's cool. But Samuel's 2 kids, who, by the way, take over as the leadership of this nation, because, it just hands down through fathers and sons, they're not cool at all. They're corrupt. They take bribes. If you had a beef with your neighbor, whoever could pay them off the best is the one that would win. They didn't care about what was right or what was wrong. They only cared about what made them happy, what made them feel, good, and it gave them the most pleasure and gave them the most power. And so the people said, this is not working. This isn't good. And again, I want to be as kind and as gracious as possible. This is all complicated, okay? Governance is always complicated. I don't care how you divvy it up. I don't care how you do it. I don't care. It's always complicated. And there comes a point where when something's not working, you will replace that something with anything, right? Like, there are revolutions that happen that, they have no plan beyond just this guy's got to go. And we get to the point sometimes, in our elections for whatever, mayor or, president or whatever, where it's like, I don't care if it's a cat on the ballot. I will elect, Mr. Meowie Paws, because even Mr. Meowie Paws, who doesn't know English or any language, because it's hard to write with paws. I don't know if you realize that's the problem with cats and writing, is they can't hold the pen. That's the problem with cats writing. But it gets so bad that we're like, yeah, put the cat in office, I get the feeling that the people of Israel had to have when they looked at Samuel's sons and said, these guys are the worst. And then they said, let's do anything else. I want to be kind, because their next decisions are real dumb. And I just want us to understand it. It could have been us. It would have been us. The people go to Samuel and they say, we don't like your sons. We don't want your sons at all. We would actually, in fact, could you just give us a king? Everybody else has a king. We'd love a king. We've never had one. Let's see if that goes better. Everybody else gets a king with an army, with an everything. We want the king with an army, with an everything. That's what we want. And Samuel, what could he do other than go to God and say, well, God, this is what they're doing. And God communicates, to Samuel. He tells Samuel, go to the people and tell them why this is a terrible idea. This is what we read in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 8, God explaining exactly why they shouldn't want a king. He says, this is how a king will reign over you, Samuel said. The king will draft your sons and assign them to his chariots and his charioteers, making them run before his chariots. Some will be generals and captains in his army. Some will be forced to plow in his fields and harvest his crops. And some will make his weapons and chariot equipment. The king will take your daughters from you, force them to cook and bake and make perfumes for him. He will take away the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them back to his own officials. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your grape harvest and distribute among his officers and his attendants. He will take your male and your female slaves and demand the finest of your cattle and donkeys for his own use. He will demand 1/10 of your flocks. You will be his slaves. And when that day comes, you're going to beg for relief from this king you're demanding, but the Lord will not help you. Just a moment of silence for thousands of years of monarchies. It's interesting because that first thing he says about the chariots, it's interesting because they're all upset about these two guys, and they should be. Again, they should be. These guys are corrupt. But he's saying, you realize that the king's not going to be better. He's going to be worse. He's going to take your sons and make them fight his wars in front of him. He's not going to take the arrows. He's not going to take the spears. Your sons will. None of this will be yours anymore. None of this. Your land's not yours. Your crops, not yours. Your livestock, not yours. Nothing will be yours anymore because the king's going to have it. And whatever you call yours, there's going to be a chunk out of it. I'm saying nothing. You're thinking it. I'm thinking it. Let's just leave it at that. It won't even be yours. He'll take a chunk out of it. And he won't just take a chunk out of it. This is pre-money days, guys. It's not like you're handing over cash. He's going to go to all your stuff, and he's going to take the best stuff. He's not going to take the stuff you want to give him. And also, he's king, so this ain't a negotiation. God seems vaguely threatening at the bottom. Well, I won't even help you. Well, all he's saying is, I'm giving you a choice. You can avoid all of this and it's fine, or you can demand this terrible situation and then I'm going to let you sleep in the bed you've made in. Because that's the choice here. The choice is not between a good king and a bad king. That's not the choice. They're all bad kings. Every king is a bad king. It's not a choice between a good king and a bad king. It's a choice between, do you want a king? Or do you want God to lead you to a life that does not include these things? Now, I want to be gracious and I want to be kind. And I get it's complicated, Like, I get that, the sons of Samuel might be so bad that you would look at all this and say, gotta wait it out. Maybe it is so bad this way. Maybe it's not. I get that, maybe it's a conversation. Maybe you got some board meetings or something. I don't know. I understand that it's maybe not quite as black and white as we know that it ends up. Because spoiler alert, this is all true. But here's what we read further, next in 1 Samuel. The people refused to listen to Samuel's warning. Even so, we still want a king, they said. We want to be like the nations around us. Our king will judge us and lead us into battle. Refused to listen. It's one thing to sit down and have an honest conversation and then have an honest disagreement with somebody. It's an entirely different thing altogether to sit down with somebody and lay out your case and they won't even listen. It's an entirely different conversation. And the people of Israel refused to listen to what Samuel had to say, which is to say they refused to listen to what God had to say. And so then they said things that are objectively stupid. We want a king to judge us. Really? You want one dude with absolute power to judge you? We want to fight his battles. We want him to lead us into battle. You want to go to war? It was so dumb. And, rejecting God, wicked, evil, all of that too. But, sometimes sins are sins because it's like a morally corrupt thing. Sometimes a sin is a sin because you're dumb. And I say that that's a really important point. The Bible tells us that the wages of sin is death. That means anything that leads to destruction, death, bad, that's a sin. It's not always just about ethics and morals, right? You can make dumb decisions and it's just as harmful and it leads to death just as much as an immoral decision, right? This was immoral in the sense that they were rejecting what God said, but it was also immoral in that it was really, really stupid. And the fact is, that could be us. These are regular people making regular decisions, living regular lives. And I want to be as gracious and as kind as I can. But I also want us to recognize this is dumb, and it could be us. And speaking of dumb, it could be us. It turns out God was right. You don't want to live under the thumb of a king. And if you fast forward the story of God's people were living under the thumb of the Caesar, the Roman king. Because that's the other thing, too. Kings are temporary, Like, there's wars, there's coups, there's all the things, And through a series of 1,000 years of nonsense, the Caesar was the king over Israel. Like, he had said, oh, the Herods are in charge. The Herods weren't in charge. They were middle management at best. And so they were afraid. And again, I want to be as gracious as God. The religious leaders of Israel were afraid of the Caesar. And so their reaction to Jesus, when Jesus comes along and preaches and teaches, it's one that is an understanding of the fear of Caesar that they lived their lives with, right? Like, they couldn't afford to just say, here's this great teacher who's performing miracles, right? They had to think, what is this going to do to our relationship with, our understanding with Rome? Because we have arrangements with Rome that keep us alive. Okay, we've got peace. It's not really peace. It's a terrible one-sided deal, but we've got this terrible one-sided deal that at least keeps us alive. What happens if Jesus enters the conversation and suddenly that's a whole different idea? Jesus ends up, the whole idea of killing Jesus, we read in the Bible, it's not about them not liking Jesus. It's not about them disagreeing with Jesus. It's not anything like that. Like, they didn't like him. They did disagree with him. But ultimately, Jesus, the reason they want him dead, the reason they go through with what they go through with is because they are afraid if Jesus is left to his own devices, he'll get a lot of people following him. Those people will become an army. That army will become a revolution, and Israel will be destroyed. And if I want to be kind and gracious, I need you guys to understand their fears were very real and valid for people that weren't Jesus, because exactly that happens 30 years later and then another 60 years after that. Like, it was a valid concern. It's just, it wasn't Jesus. And so they execute this plan. It involved Judas, one of Jesus' closest friends and disciples, arresting Jesus in his favorite, secret, happy place. A sham of a trial that wasn't a trial. It was just, hey, we declare you guilty, no matter what you say and do. It was Jesus being convicted, the crime he's convicted of opposing Rome, of wanting to overthrow Rome. And then with that as your conviction, if that's what he's guilty of, well, then Rome will kill him. So they declare he is against Rome, and then they hand him over to the governor, Pontius Pilate, and they thought, okay, great, he'll be taken care of, we're done. It was actually not a terrible plan. I don't want to, encourage the people who, or, talk highly of the people who killed Jesus, but it wasn't a horrible plan. It kind of covers all their bases. The problem was Pontius Pilate would not cooperate. Because Pontius Pilate sat down with Jesus and he's like, guys, this guy's awesome. Have you all ever talked to him? Okay, fine, you had the trial, but if you just had a conversation, this is the coolest dude. And he and Jesus had this kind of an argument, but it's fine. And I don't know if you've ever, we have these disagreements in our world. I know, shocking. But most times you disagree with somebody, it feels icky afterwards. That's a technical term. It's a technical theological term. You feel icky. You feel like I need to take a shower. But you ever have a debate with somebody and it goes totally fine? And you leave as friends and it's totally cool? That's almost a better feeling than getting somebody to agree with you. And Pilate and Jesus kind of go back and forth in this little argument, and it ends well. And Pilate's like, man, that guy's the coolest. Like, he's awesome. And he's certainly, man, there's no evidence that he wants to overthrow Rome. None. The dude's a carpenter. What's he going to do? Table us to death? You know, like, I guess he could build a door and then try not to let us in. Super good lock on the, like, what's he going to do? I mean, the reality of the situation is Pilate looked at Jesus and said, this guy didn't do anything. And so over and over and time and again, over and over, time and again, like this whole incident, if you can just lay out this whole incident, all Pilate is doing is telling the Jews, this guy is fine. What is your problem? And this plan that they had to frame Jesus for this ridiculous charge, you know, and then take him to court and expect the Romans to do their bidding. It's not going to work if you're Pilate. And so, you know, they need a backup plan. And this is that backup plan, which we read in the Gospel of John. Pilate tried to release Jesus, but the Jewish leaders shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform that is called the stone pavement in Hebrew, or Gabbatha. It was now about noon on the day of preparation for the Passover, and Pilate said to the people, look, here's your king. Away with him, they yelled. Away with him. Crucify him. What? Crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the leading priests shouted back. And then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified. Now, there's a little bit of sarcasm there with Pilate, I think. You know, like here's your king. But also, did you guys catch the threat of the Jewish people to Pilate? Like, if you don't kill Jesus, you're not on the side of Caesar. And if you're not on the side of Caesar, you know what happens? You end up on a cross. The religious leaders of Israel threatened a Roman governor with the wrath of the king of Rome. And they did so because, as they confessed, as they said, we have no king but the Caesar. Now, we started this whole thing by talking about how the Jewish people had no king. Except we did say they did have a king. We did say that they had a king. That king was God. For the religious leaders to say the sentence, we have no king but Caesar, is for them to say, God is not our king. The religious leaders of God's people said, God is not our king. And I'm trying to be as kind and gracious as I can. But like, we always focus on the physical aspect of the death of Jesus. We talked about this last week, that like we're always thinking about like the torture and the beatings and the all of that. Like, we're always talking about that. But man, I'll be honest, for my money, this is the worst part of the crucifixion. For the Jewish people to so sell out their values, to take everything they have been for 2,000 years and light it on fire and drop it in a toilet and flush the toilet and then go to the sewage plant and fish it back out so they can bury it in the dirt. They completely sold out their values to kill Jesus. And the funny thing is, not really funny, haha, but it's funny-ish. This entire thing we started with was the religious leaders are afraid of the Romans. And here comes a Roman who's all, I'm not going to kill him. I think he's innocent. They were wrong from the start. And I don't know if it was just like deep hatred. I don't know if it's, like you start down a path and you can't, like you feel like, you're 10 steps in and you just think, I can't go back. I don't know. But what I know is in order to execute Jesus, the religious leaders of Israel took everything they believed in and abandoned it. And yeah, that could be us. We could do that. I mean, in one way or another, we probably all have done that in a variety of ways. And it's just, sometimes preachers like me, we come down on people too much. Like there's the hellfire and brimstone guys who are just angry all the time. There's the Pentecostal dudes who are just so sweaty because they're wearing those suits and they're yelling around and yelling. And running around and yelling makes you sweaty when you're wearing a suit. You can always tell how angry a preacher is by how much sweat he's got. Dry as a bone, not angry at all, We get a bad rap for that. But I think sometimes we're just trying to communicate this thing that we're talking about. Human beings are lost. We are dark. We are petty. We are fickle. We are foolish. We are greedy. We live in fear. We let anxiety drive us. We let jealousy be the reason we lash out at people. We're graceless. We're faithless. And when the God of the universe says, guys, I'm really trying to help you out here, we say, no, we're good. Like toddlers trying to eat lasagna. You're like, let me help you. No, I've got it. Smash it on my face. That's us. And I think with that said, that's what makes the most famous thing Jesus said on the cross powerful. This is where we read one last time from the Gospel of John. One of Jesus' famous last words, absolutely, I'm pretty sure the most famous last word of Jesus, goes like this. It says, a jar of sour wine was sitting there by the cross, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and they held it up to his lips. When Jesus had tasted it, he said, it is finished. Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It's funny. We always focus on this question, what is it? It says it is finished. So what is it? And different churches, different denominations, different perspectives, we have different ideas of that. And look, I'm here to tell you, I don't know. What I can tell you is I can only assume it's the thing that Jesus came here to do. And so we know that there's a few things Jesus came here to do. Jesus came here to show us who God is. Jesus came here to show us how we should live. Jesus came here to, to save us, to do away with what evil is, to do away with what Satan is doing, to ransom us, he says, from darkness and sin and evil, to bring us home, to forgive us of sin. Look, you can pick one, you can pick all of them. I don't care. But here's what we need to understand. The problem with people is that we can't save ourselves. Even if it was theoretically possible, even if God would say, hey guys, so you guys have got yourself a little bit of a pickle. Here's what you do to fix it. We just told these stories, right? Do you really think that we could do that? That we were capable of fixing this problem on our own? I had this dog one time and he used to eat the wall. He would just stick his nose in the wall and he would eat the wall. And we'd come home and there'd be chunks out of the wall and drywall on his face. Because just as bad as cats are at riding, dogs are really bad at using napkins. This dog for like 8 months one year just had drywall in his nose. Like we couldn't get it out. And we thought maybe it was dangerous, and it worked itself out. It was fine. Also, we got cancer and died. So, like, it's not a sad story. But, well, that was sad. I don't know why we went there with it. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, I didn't ask my beloved Griffey, dude, you got to fix that. Like, you ate the wall. You got to fix the wall. I can't ask Griffey to do that. He still doesn't have thumbs. He can't hold the drywall scraper. I also can't fix the wall, to be fair. We had a good friend of ours do it for us, if I'm being honest. But in the same way that I can't ask my dog to fix the wall that he ate, God can't just come to humanity and say, fix the problems you've created. We can't do it. And so here comes Jesus the contractor. Fix the wall. When Jesus said it is finished, what he's saying is this is what needs to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. And what that means is this. God has saved humanity in its past tense. It was done thousands of years before any of you were born. Right? Like at the end of the day, it's a fixed place. It's a fixed spot in time and space. God saved humanity on the cross. It is finished. What we could not do, Jesus did. What we could not fix, Jesus fixed. And that is not potential. It is not something that might happen. It is not something that, well, if I pray the right prayer, or I do the right rite, or I do the right thing, or I join the right church, or I don't sin too much, or I don't ask this, or I don't none of that means anything. What means something is that Jesus on the cross said, it's done. It's finished. The Greek there doesn't actually say finished, it says accomplished. It is accomplished. I did the thing that needed to be done, it says Jesus. And I got to tell you, I am so grateful because if he's not going to do it, who is? The people who asked for a king? If he's not going to do it, who is? The people who said we have no king but the Caesar? If he's not going to do it, who's going to do it? Me? I can't even fix the wall that my dog ate. Jesus comes along and says, I'll do it. I'll fix it. And at the cross, he says, cool, it's done. What I came to accomplish, I came to accomplish. Our faith is only grace. It is only the gift of God. It is only the work of Christ. If you want to know why you are saved, it's because of Jesus. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. So often we wonder, well, what about this and what about that? Jesus on the cross is a fixed time and place. You can take it, you can leave it if you feel like it. That's between you and God and whatever else. But the objective reality of your salvation, the objective reality of what needed to be done so that you will be saved, it was done 2,000 years ago. And it's the greatest news because it doesn't depend on our efforts. It doesn't depend on our righteousness. It doesn't depend on our ability to make good decisions. It doesn't depend on our ability to say the right thing back to God. It doesn't, none of that. It depends on the love and the compassion and the graciousness of Jesus. I want to be as loving and as gracious as I can as I tell these stories. And I can do that because Jesus was as loving and as gracious as he could be. He looked at us and he said, yeah, I'll do it. And on the cross, he said, it's done. And now we as Christians, we simply live our lives responding to that in appreciation, learning from it, growing in it. We don't go to God hoping that we'll be saved. We go to God knowing we are. We don't go to God hoping that it's fine. We go to God knowing it's always been fine. Because at the end of the day, it has only ever been about Jesus. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week to say yes to Jesus, to say, yeah, that's awesome. I want to just live my life in appreciation of that. The Bible teaches that we're to repent to be baptized. It sounds like two things, really just one. And repentance, it's like I want to turn my back on who I used to be. I want to be the person that God wants me to be, not the person that I want to be. And in baptism, it's I'm going to align myself with Jesus. Jesus was dead, buried, and raised, and I'm going to be dead. I'm going to be buried. I'm going to be raised. Whatever happens to Jesus, I want to be with Jesus. I'm hitching my wagon to Jesus. I'm riding his coattails. Baptism is us saying I am riding Jesus' coattails. That's all it really is. I mean, there's like metaphors and stuff, but still, like, and we're promised forgiveness. We're promised his spirit. But ultimately, we are people who look at the cross and say, that is where everything that needed to happen happened. Because we couldn't do it, God did. As we stand,